Hi guys, so I thought it'd be cool to do a video about how we make our sheaths. This video is just going to be about sheaths, although we do make other things in leather. I have made a lot of things in leather over the last 10 years. Something like this behind me, which is a suit of armour. I've got a helmet there. Those of you that have been to our showroom, you'll see random leather things, and you'll know that our leatherwork studio is like 3,500 square feet and has all the toys in it. This is pretty basic, so we're going to keep it fairly light and simple, and I'm not going to be giving away secrets. This is not a how-to, this is just how I do it and what works for me. But I will give you a little bit of background on sort of where I've sort of come from in terms of the leather side of things. So for me, I've always had a massive passion for like blacksmithing and knives and stuff like that. So the leather was always kind of secondary. But when we first started out, we found that sort of all the knife, not all of them, but a lot of the knife makers that we sort of aspired to be like, always let themselves down on their leatherwork. So they would make a fantastic knife and then the leather would always be like an afterthought. So for us, it became like a point of pride to have really good leather, and so that we weren't buying them in or having them like made in big batches or anything like that. So we actually make each knife, when we make a knife, we take that knife and then we wet form that individual knife to that sheath individually to that knife. So each one is slightly different. This gives like a best overall fit, because I don't really believe in then like taking a piece of leather, sewing it in half and then jamming a knife into it till it fits. So we actually wet form each sheath to each knife. It's quite labour intensive, but for me it works really well. I like the finish, and I like the sort of method to it, and it just works for me. I'm not saying, you know, this isn't a how-to, like I say, so you know, this is just how we go about doing it. But yeah, I wanted it to, back in the day, I wanted it to be part of our sort of selling point, if you like, that we make everything in house, and each thing is fitted to each individual sheath, and that's like super important. But I never really had a massive passion for it back then. I started doing more and more, and we started getting some commissions, and I used to make belts and little pouches and stuff, and then the commissions started getting slightly bigger and a bit more sort of weird. So yeah, like the suit of armour, for example. And then I used to make a lot of these are Venetian masquerade masks. And for those of anyone that's done leather, moulding, wet forming this into a form of leather and then having it keep that shape is very difficult. So it was like a challenge, and it was quite an interesting task. And then something that I made years ago, but is a bit more sort of relevant right now. Plague masks, used to do a few of these, more for like wall hanger stuff and just interest pieces really, and just to see if I could make stuff like this. So it was a bit of fun, and you know, used bits of scrap and stuff like that, you know. But the main one was always the sheaths. So what I'll do, I'm going to try and chop this video up and timestamp it a little bit, so you can skip ahead if you're genuinely wanting to learn about leather. I will try and I will show you a lot of demo and how I go about things. But like I said, I'm going to use minimal kit as well, sort of the most basic of all tools. I will do a quick tour of our studio, just so you can see what we are using and you know what it does take to make a leather sheath, a simple leather sheath, especially if you're doing, you know, 20 or 30 a month. Okay then, so what we're going to be making is a pair of sheaths for a pair of cales. We've got the two cales here, and these are some that we've made earlier. This is a right hand and this is a left hand. So this is exactly what we're going to be making. There's a brown one in the right. So we're going to make these exactly replicas of these, but both sheaths I need to make are brown. Okay. Tools I'm going to use, really simply. This is an awl, which is just a metal spike. This is a stitch groover, and there is a little cutting face just here, and I'll show you how that's used in a moment. This is an edge beveler, and there's a little groove in here, and there's a little cutting head in the front there. Your basic Stanley knife, and this is a little bottle of oil, and this is a little roll of cling film. That is the sort of basic tools you'll need. Outside of, I need a little hammer and I've got several different chemicals and some dyes and stuff. And then sewing is going to be a different thing, so I'll show you how to do that. I've got a sewing machine. It's like a manual sewing machine, but I'll show you how to do that by hand as well. Okay, so here I have my piece of leather. Now I've already drawn a template on here, but I'll get to that in a second. So our leather comes from Mexico. It is the best leather in the world. It comes from a specialist breeder and like tannery, but they basically their goal is to have like no scars, but like a really thick hide. So this is a 9-ounce tooling hide. That is an old like unit of measurement for leathers, but that basically means that it's 3.6 millimeters thereabouts. That's how thick it is. The tooling hide basically means that it will take a really good mark if we want to emboss it or engrave it. There's like Sheridan style patterns that you see on like sort of Western gun holsters and stuff like that. And they're the sort of traditional stuff, but there's lots of different types. But this is what this will do. But it also means that it will wet form very well and hold that shape very well. The reason we go from there is that they don't get from this place in Mexico is, like I say, it's the best in the world, but equally it doesn't have any scars in it. So there are some, obviously animals do pick up scars over time, but because the animals are bred for their leather rather than their meat, the animals are a bit older, and they're kept in enclosures that don't have barbed wire and things like that. So yeah, the leather's really, really good and scar free. Now there are some marks you get in leather, so like this particular one where they've got a hole in it, that's where it's been hung up, and these sort of clamp marks where they've been hung up and stretched. But those are little things that you just cut round, and they're always on the outside. But I will still always inspect for scars, just in case. And then they do have like little marks, but nothing major. Okay, so what I've got here then is my template. Now this is a kale, that's what we're making, a kale sheath. So this is a template, and obviously I make a lot of these, so I have a basic template. Now, there's a reason I don't have this on a piece of wood. That way, if I need to bend this for whatever reason, and then wet form it back, it means I can get more out of each hide, so I get less wastage. So if there's like a little mark in a place, I can bend around the mark, draw around it, and then wet form it and bend it back again when I've cut. All right, so having fixed ones is fine, and you do get like big metal ones that you can have made, but these leather ones suffice for me, and this is made out of a piece of scrap, so it's, you know, no money wasted, no world's resources wasted either. So I've drawn on here a left-handed one, so basically that is to put the sheath the other way up, and it puts the belt loop on the other side. But all I'm going to do here, I'm going to draw really simply. I'm just making sure I can fit something on the bottom here. I'm just going to draw around this real quick. And this is on the inside of the leather, so the rough side, which will be on the inside of the sheath. So any sort of marks on this side really don't get seen. But we'll still be careful with the tool marks. So I've got kale L, kale right, okay, and I'm going to cut this out now. I will do one in real time, and then I'll cut the other one, and we'll go from there. So I do everything sitting down. So I take my standing knife, and I know because this is probably waste, I need a welt in a moment, but I can't fit my welt in anywhere here, so this is probably waste, so I'll just take that off dead quick. And basically this means I can use, like, cut from a smaller piece of leather, and it means I'm not dragging a big hide around and scratching it on the edges of tables or getting it dirty. Speaking about getting it dirty, not only do I wash my arms, I wash my forearms and my hands, and then I often wear gloves all the time. I'll often get changed before I do leather. Getting like metal dust and stuff into the leather, or any sort of grease and stuff like that, will affect your finish quite badly. And you'll leave like fingerprints and stuff. So it's really important to, you know, if you want to keep a clean sort of like nice tidy finish, that it's you keep yourself clean at all times. So now these cuts aren't massively important. You know, I'm sticking to the lines, but I'm not really. I know this isn't going to be my final shape, so I'm just cutting out the shield quite close. But as I say, there'll be, and you'll see it later on, there are multiple stages where we will change the shape of this sheath. Okay, so that's my first shield cut out. I'll cut the second one out and then we'll come back and do some edge beveling. So very quickly, this is another piece that we need to cut out for the internal part of our sheath. This is called a welt, and this is the form of the knife. So there's one here, it's a master, and this is the form of the knife for the inside, and then the form of the sheath for the outside. So you can see that it fits in there, yeah, and gives enough space for the knife to move in and out. Now this is really important, and it's arguably one of the most important parts of the sheath. What I do, I cut all my welts from the same leather, and this is just a piece, as you can see, it's not big enough to cut a shield from, and I will get 5 or 6 welts out of each sort of piece of scrap this size. So I'm going to cut one of these out dead quickly for this, and then we're going to edge bevel one of the other sheaves. I will talk about how these parts are originally made without using templates as well. I'm just going to cut this out now. Just nip that off. Cool. So that's my welt, and those are the 2 parts of my leather sheath. I'm just going to put that down for a second, and I'll quickly talk about how these parts are made. So, a shield then is very simply to fit around this knife. Now, what you can normally do is you can draw around the inside of your knife, just nice and roughly like this. Obviously this isn't how I really do it, but nice and quick demo. Draw around the inside of my knife and understand where my knife wants to fit. Take a set of calipers, and I would run that like this, and you can see that is already taking the form of the sheath roughly. What I would then do, and then flip the knife over, and now this is a weird shape, but I would flip it over so it sits in its middle, and I would mark a center point, okay, and then I'd roll it over again, mark that again, and then mark like this, and that gives me a rough, and you can just see, gives me a rough shield shape. Now I make mine slightly oversized. This one is about 1 centimetre bigger than what I've just roughly done there. Now obviously this would be a bit more precision if you were doing it for real. And the welt is made in much the same way. So you can see how that shape now has become like my welt. And all I would do is decide on my termination point and then come up and then do that. Yeah. So obviously whatever the length of the knife would be for this particular one, it'd be like there. Yeah, and that fits, and then I would cut that out as an individual section. But that really quickly is how these parts are designed. So if you had an irregular shape or something like this, but this is all for wet forming. Bigger knives and bowies, wouldn't recommend that you do sheaves like this, but that's a different subject. Okay, right, putting that away then. So the next tool I need is this edge beveler. Edge beveler is literally exactly as it says on the tin. It takes the edge off and bevels back the edge. So all I'm doing is cutting inside edge of this off. I'll give you a close up in a second. So I'm doing the top inside line and then the outside line as well. Being really careful not to put a score mark or any tool marks on the outside of the sheath. And obviously I've made a lot of these, so I might be making this look a little bit easier, but it's just one of those things. It's just a muscle memory type deal. Okay, so you can see that I've knocked off that corner all the way around on both sides, and it gives this rounded finish. Now we'll come back to that later because I actually need to sort of tidy this up, and I will do it again. But but that is basically where I'm at. My next stage, and this is where we start involving like glues and chemicals and stuff like that. My next stage is to glue this on. Now that is done with standard contact cement. I've seen people use PVA. This one's specially designed for leather. It's the best I found. And the reason I like this one, it is just a standard contact cement, but it will do it when the leather is wet. So most of them, when you wet the leather, it will just rub off and it will look horrible, and then it won't stick properly. This one, when you get it, if you get this on and then you put the glue on both sides, when you come to form it over, it will do it completely wet, so you can do everything wet and not have to worry about the glue sort of not sticking properly. And but I'll show you that in a moment. And like I say, I'm trying to keep this as real time as possible, so you understand what goes into it. Now, this is the right-handed sheath. So I'll just apply glue to this, put that out of the way, and I'll put the sheath, the welt, on the outside, so the side on the same side as the belt loop. I'll line that up to my outer edge. And this is where you can make adjustments and square it up if it's slightly bent or whatever, because obviously leather has got like a grain to it. So if I need to move it around, this is where I do that. And it doesn't matter if I've got a little bit of a lip or an overlap, and it's kind of advantageous to have that, and you'll see why shortly. Okay, so with my sheaths as well, we often have these two grooves here, and it's just a decoration thing really, but what I do, I take my stitch groover, which is basically all it is doing is putting a neat little groove in the leather like that, okay? And we'll use this again later, but for now all I'm going to do is going to put that up into there. Like that. So I've got my line that runs all the way around, and then all I'm going to do now, this doesn't go that deep, it's like less than 0.5 millimeter, but this will help me fold the leather, and it will just give me a nice even fold, and then it basically helps me like sort of wet form it over, which we'll come to in a moment. Now this leather goes off pretty quickly, so all I'm going to do is trim back these edges, and again the little sort of overlap helps you sort of do any mistakes, you know, clean up any little bits. Cool. So now I've got to this stage, I'm going to get the other one to the same stage and then we'll come back to it. So what we want to do now, we want to sort of fold over the belt loop. Now some people sew this, which is fine. What we do is make a groove in here with the stitch groover, so this, and then sew that over, and then the groove sort of hides the stitches and clears the path of the stitches. These two call for rivets. We're going to use a special type of like rapid rivet, and they're just hammered on, but they're much stronger. So you'll be able to swing off one of these. They don't rot away, or they don't pull out eventually, or you can't cut through them. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to stamp 2 holes like this. This is just a standard hole punch type thing. It's a bit more heavy duty for the leather. And this is a 3mm hole, which is the same size as the rivet peg. Okay, and then I want to fold this over. Now my eyes are pretty good, so I can see that I've just done fold it over, and I want to keep it equidistant and keep it nice and parallel. Couple of dots. Same here. Okay, take my punch again. Now my holes
all nicely line up. I'm going to go over to the rivet and the rivet sort of area, which has got a piece of granite in that we use as like an anvil, and then we'll set some rivets. This is the rivet here, and basically it's in two parts. So we put the little posts through, okay, and they've got like a little flat back on there. They're quite small, so apologies if you can't see them properly. And then the cap just pops over the top. These rivets are made of bronze, and they've got like a special coating on. Now, so I've got my rivets on, and they sort of clip into place. I'm just going to put that over the top of my granite table, and then I'm just going to tap them down. Cool. So that's them set, and then I'm going to flip the sheath over, put them on the edge of the granite table. And this is a smaller sort of pin hammer, sort of like tiny little pin hammer, sorry, and it's got like a chamfered sort of domed head. And basically I'm going to drive them down, and this will drive them below the edge of the leather, and then we use another tool to drive them in a little bit further, and that just helps them, you know, stops the knife contacting them at all. Here's the other tool. You can see now they're completely clear, and it mushrooms out a little bit at the back, but it's no problem. And when this takes on water and dye, it will swell up back to the original size. Sheaths are nearly ready for wet forming then, but now we're about to seal them over. I want to start my antibacterial treatment. Now, I do several types of antibacterial treatment, and I do it at different stages of the making the sheath. This is the only stage that I'll apply like internally. I use a series of like washes and dips to dye my sheaths, which is not normal, it's not the standard, but it's the method that works for me, and it's something that I've developed over like the 10 or so years. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I'm applying here. Like I say, it's taken me 10 years to figure it all out and get it right, and get to a stage where that I'm happy, and it's constantly evolving as well. So, but this is a series of like chemical washes and certain elements that will get applied to the inside and outside of the sheaths. And this particular one is brown. Just making sure to get right in on the welt there, down the middle. There's no need for me to do this section just yet. We'll come to that in a moment. You can see why the dye isn't taking here because of the glue. That's fine. But what it means is, this is why I sort of had that little overlap. That means I can trim that off. So is there any glue on the front there, I can trim that back, because that'll affect the final finish of the sheath. Excellent. Right, so that's done. Just put that away so it doesn't spill all over the place. Cool. So the next thing to do is leave them to dry. But I'm not going to sit around twiddling my thumbs. I've got to prep the knives for the wet forming. Okay. So for that, what I need is a little bottle of oil. Now this is camellia oil. Those of you that know our sort of products will be familiar with it out of the maintenance kits. So all I'm going to do, a little drop of oil on each side of the blade, like that. I'm just going to work it up the blade, both sides and the edge, and then the spine as well. I'm going to take my cling film. This is always the fun bit, trying to find the end of it. There it is. Take my cling film, I'm going to place my knife. I'm just going to wrap the knife, keeping the tip nice and secure. Just a couple of times. Now, the reason I'm doing this is that this is a stainless steel, but if it was sat in a wet sheath for a protracted period of time, any moisture on there could effectively rust the knife. It would be fairly easy fix to get out, seeing as we are in the middle of a knife making factory. However, if you were to do this at home or whatever, and you got it wet and it would actually rust, you might struggle to get it out again. But doing it like this means you've got no problems, and it shouldn't happen at all. So I'm going to do that to both knives. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go away and I'm going to soak one of these in some water, normal lukewarm water, and I'm going to soak it for about 60 seconds or so, and basically that will give me the sort of ability to form it. Okay, so now wet the sheath, and it's not sopping wet, but it is wet through, and all I'm going to do is pre-fold it. So I'm just going to fold it over nice and hard, and then sort of break down the spine section. Okay, I'm now going to put my knife in. And I'm going to just sit down now, just get the weight on. So I'm just forming the knife nice and easy. Forming the sheath even around the knife, pressing down in the sort of bulbous areas. Now you can see I've got this edge forming, okay, this like lip, okay, and this is where I'll always leave a little bit of extra and I'll trim it off, because like I say, the leather will shrink and grow in certain areas when it's wet, and it's always slightly different. It's always worth leaving a little bit and then trimming it off. Like I say, it's labour intensive, but it makes for a better product, which is the most important thing. Okay, I'm going to mark these areas. Just take the knife out of the way for a moment, because obviously it is still sharp, so it can hurt me. And I'm going to trim now. It's important when the leather is wet that you are working on a clean surface. Any sort of like things like this will mark the outside of the sheath, so little bits of scrap and stuff. So I had a little tidy up just off camera. Now we've cut our shape. Enter the glue again. And this is where this glue being applied to wet leather is awesome. And like I said, guys, I'm trying to do this as real time as possible. It's not exciting. I know it's not like, you know, this isn't like forged in fire or anything like that, but this is the reality of how this stuff is made. It doesn't take 5 minutes, and it doesn't take, you know, it's not just unpacked from a box and then the made in China sticker scrubbed off. It is done for real, by hand. Okay, now what will happen is I will leave that like that for now. Some of you might have noticed that this is a different colour knife now. However, it's because I act as my own cameraman and I messed up the filming. So I've applied my glue. I will now leave this to set for about 10 minutes, and then when I come to close it up again, it will bond really nicely back together. And then we will form it a little bit more, and it will get left to dry. Right then, so it's been 10 minutes. I've left the glue to cure. All I'm going to do is going to pinch it together and it will stick. Making sure to fold the spine down nice and firm. Put the knife in, a bit more forming. Making sure it's all square and nice and straight. We can correct this again later. Making sure the knife's all nice and straight. And that is it. So from this stage then, I'll let this dry. I leave it in front of like a desktop fan on a special box that I made that helps it dry out. And it will dry out over about 4 or 5 hours, and then I will actually leave them overnight usually. So this is normally the last process I'll do at the end of the day. And then I'll put it in front of the fan, turn the fan off after a couple of hours, and then let them dry naturally overnight. Because I want this welt to be completely dry through. If it's still wet, it will cause problems in later processes, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I hope you've enjoyed that so far, guys, but this is the end of part 1, and we'll come back to a dry sheath go back to the original knives, and we'll go from there.